Moby.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Is there a quiet rapprochement taking place on the political right? After the election, David Cameron and George Osborne put clear water, an ocean even, between the Tory leadership and much of the party's grassroots and certainly the Eurosceptics. But was that distance to do with policies or the perceived extreme attitudes of those who expressed them? Swivel-eyed loons, the hang-em and flog-em brigade, the ones who call for British jobs for British workers and a cap on immigration. Oh, and no, no, never to the euro. Now, though, are they the ones who are having the last laugh? Tim Montgomery of the Times newspapers thinks so.
Doesn't he feel faintly embarrassed that in 5 short years he's gone from hugger husky to gasser badger?
The only embarrassing thing is this tortured performance.
It's hard to get voters' attention. We all lead such busy lives. Even I, a political anorak, have stopped watching Prime Minister's Question Time. But occasionally something interesting happens at PMQs, like last week.
We need to roll back some of the green regulations and charges that are putting up bills. Yes, yes.
The man who promised the greenest government ever doesn't sound quite so green anymore. The man who said he'd stop banging on about Europe has had to bang on a bit about Europe. On immigration, welfare and tax, David Cameron has steadily moved to the right. Or has he? Some in the Parliamentary Conservative Party don't see things in such simple terms.
I don't really see it quite as sort of right and left. What I think is really important is that we as a party don't make those distinctions, but actually make a very common cause, which is being on people's side, working on the side of families and just being there for them, changing our language, making sure that we're seen to be on the side of the consumer, not vested interests. I think we need an optimistic message. I think we need to be up for things that are out there in sort of both globally but also nationally.
The right gets a bad press. Grassroots Tory members are called swivel-eyed loons. Supporters of UKIP are called clowns and fruitcakes. But who are the sanest people in politics? Is it the people who supported the euro, or those on the right who always said it would cause the economic problems that it has? What about the people who welcomed mass immigration into this country? Or was it the right who always said that immigration of the kind we saw would cause wages to fall and house prices to rise? Some people on the right of the Conservative Party are certainly feeling vindicated by the way events have moved on.
I think it's quite extraordinary on so many of the macro issues on, for example, the question of Europe and whether Britain should be part of the euro or whether we should have a referendum, on the question of immigration, on the question of welfare reform, positions that were once dismissed as beyond the pale, as the preserve of free market right-wingers like me, are increasingly mainstream. They're increasingly accepted as being sensible, normal and essential reform.
The traditional right isn't perfect. It needs to learn from the people around David Cameron, the Cameroons, about the importance of public services and changing social attitudes. The Conservative Party has to become a broad centre-right church again, stretching from the centre to the traditional right.
How much of the cost is that?
The party has to speak to Sun, Daily Mail and Times readers. It's what Margaret Thatcher did with her appeal to the housewives of the 1970s.
Can I have 2 pounds of the smaller ones?
It's what John Major did in 1992 with his message of opportunity for all.
Steak pie boiled!
He offered red meat to voters in the form of a tax cut, but he also represented upwards mobility and classlessness. A party that didn't just listen to liberal Britain, but also heard the roar of Middle England.
Well, Tim Montgomery is here. Also with us, Raphael Baer, the political editor of The New Statesman. Tim Montgomery, you know, you set out your case there, but the problem is that none of the twain shall actually meet, because David Cameron, it's the social attitudes that he perceives as much as the policies, which he finds so difficult to deal with.
I think that's absolutely true, but a lot of people, I think, when they're losing arguments, start describing people in negative, pejorative terms. So the right is described as swivel-eyed loons, nutcases, fruitcakes. And what I just wanted to do in my article at the Times and in that film is actually say that the right do have a problem because they are able to be caricatured in that way, but on fundamental issues, whether it's the impact of the welfare state on the poor, whether it's the impact of immigration on house prices, whether it's Europe, the right have been vindicated, and they must be part of the Conservative coalition.
Why do you think that David Cameron and the modernisers were so unwilling to listen in the early days when, of course, they had not won an election, they had gone into a coalition after it? Why were they so unwilling to listen?
Well, I think we had reached a stage in this country where a lot of people were sort of culturally inoculated against ever voting Conservative. And one of the reasons for that, as Tim knows, is that people thought the Conservatives there was a sort of a nasty, mean-spirited element of the party that simply sort of wasn't reconciled with cultural, demographic changes that had happened in Britain. And there are two important things going on here. I mean, first of all, I'm interested in the fact that Tim says the right has been vindicated about all the big things that have happened. But in the film and in what you've just said, you didn't mention the single biggest thing that's happened in British political economy for a generation, which is the financial crisis. And there are just as many people on the left who'd say, actually, the left is vindicated, and sort of even Marxists will say, well, look, actually, this was a crisis in capitalism, and what did the right have to say about that? So
yeah, but we're going to go into that. Then you've also got the situation where the left, Labour, were never going to take us into the euro. We're in favour of welfare reform. All these things, but the point surely is that David Cameron, in a sense, is as much at one end of the spectrum as he would say originally the right was at the other end of the spectrum. And so who moves? It'll be David Cameron that moves.
Well, I think a lot of the problem, and Raphael is exactly right to say the Conservative Party had a big problem. David Cameron diagnosed it incorrectly from the beginning. That was the problem. He thought the Conservative Party was too right-wing. That was the big error. It's not too right-wing, because on all of those issues we've been discussing, those issues are popular. The problem with the Conservative Party, and this is why John Major was actually such a successful Conservative leader in 1992, the Conservative Party is not seen on the side of the poor, the people impacted by the financial crisis, the low paid. And it's that combination of right-wing policies with a concern for the blue-collar vote. That's when the Conservative Party dominates politics.
But Tim, this is sort of an internal grief in the Conservative Party, really, that other people don't necessarily need to intrude in. I mean, the problem that the Conservatives have had isn't that the reason they didn't win a majority in 2010 isn't because people thought, David Cameron was secretly in love with the European Union, or that Conservatives actually had a real affection for mass immigration. And so the situation you've got now isn't that people think David Cameron believes something that they don't believe. It's that they don't think he believes in anything at all. And that's something that people
I think
in the Conservative
Party hasn't convinced people that we understand how tough life is for people. They like our positions on Europe and crime and immigration, but who will look after us in tough times?
But they also think he's out of touch, because actually, is it not the case to say that many of grassroots stories actually don't care about same-sex marriage, actually don't care about women bishops in the Church of England, actually are annoyed about the delay in the married tax allowance? That they see David Cameron as being of a completely different ilk that they can't relate to, and that in fact that he, in a sense, can't relate to them.
Yeah, I think the traditional right, if you like, has stuff to learn from David Cameron on those issues.
But in 2005, Michael Howard says, the way that this party has been going, we've tried and tried again, now we've tested this to destruction and we just don't have the right model. And it seems what you're saying is that they don't have the right model to win a majority.
They still don't have the right model. And the election to learn from is 1992, when John Major combined a pretty traditional Conservative recipe, for example, on tax cuts. Remember the tax bombshell campaign, a very Tory message. But people looked at him and thought, that's the upwardly mobile, classless Conservative Party that I want to support. And they don't see that at the moment. And it's the combination of those two things that will transform the Conservative Party.
But in 1992, you didn't have UKIP. And there is an important point here. Which
had
is
the referendum passed.
But the important point is that you will see, in your film, for example, you made the point that the Conservative Party has to reach out to people who are voting for UKIP, but there's an enormous danger that people will see that as the Conservative Party reaching out to UKIP itself. And frankly, if there are Lib Dem strategists or people around Ed Miliband watching this, they will be praying for the Conservative Party to start talking about doing deals with UKIP.
But we're wrong to kind of homogenise the right, aren't we? Because the right themselves are very divided.
Yes, the right is divided, and it's now David Cameron's biggest problem. Mrs. Thatcher won elections in the 1980s because the right was united and the left was divided.
And if the right stays disunited, can David Cameron win another election?
Very, very hard. And that is why he must unite the right before he has a chance of winning the next election. And I think he's doing some very good things in that direction. But Raphael is also right. It's finding issues that will appeal to the UKIP voter and the Lib Dem voter, which includes cost of living and other issues that aren't just the typical predictable issues.
Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.